Hi there. Welcome back to the part 2 of Build AI-Powered Apps crash course. In this part, we're going to talk about comments and docstrings, how we can implement them into our code to make it more explainable to us and to the programmers if you're going to share your code with others. How we can implement error catching and the importance of error catching. And we're going to also talk about how we can debug our code using Visual Studio Code's powerful debugging tool and the importance of why we should use debugging to understand our code and to solve some problems which may emerge. And we're going to build our first OpenAI app with using GPT 3.5 Turbo or GPT-4. Up to you. So let's get started. Let's begin with comments and docstrings, and I want to add that we will be starting a new virtual environment for our app as well towards the end. So comments are specified with a hashtag symbol. This is just explanatory text, and the code for these lines are not executed by the code. For example, before we say return the number list, we can make a hashtag, and then we can say this is to return the list of numbers. So this usually is before lines of code to explain what happens, either before functions or before lines of code. So you can use hashtags like that. Docstrings are a little bit different and is indicated by 3 double quotation marks or single quotation marks. For example, we can create a docstring by creating triple quotation marks. The end quotation mark will be auto-completed, and then we can write here, this is a docstring. This is for additional information. Docstrings can also have new lines in them, as you see. So this is good with docstrings. However, if you're writing a comment, then if you make a new line, you have to add a hashtag for each new line. So docstrings is more useful if you're going to write a long sentence or a few sentences to explain. Generally speaking, docstrings are used under functions or classes to explain what that function is going to do. You can also use comments and docstrings and any combination of both. Just to show you a showcase, I built this app, GPT-4 Autocoder Self-Improver. I'll put the link in the description. You can try it with your own API key. You can watch the video about this. You can actually download the code if you're a Patreon supporter. There's also a more advanced version. You can chat with us at Discord, follow on Twitter. But this is interesting. This was done with Streamlit. You can try it. So this is the purpose of this series, is to get anybody who's interested up and running with coding and to be able to build AI-powered apps quickly and effectively. Now let's move on to error catching. Here we have 2 functions. One of them is to generate a numbers list. We give it a start number and an end number, and we use some built-in Python methods to generate a numbers list from the start number and ending with the end number. The end number here is inclusive. Usually the range method treats the last number as exclusive, so you won't have the last number in the list, but that's why we're adding +1 to it. That makes it inclusive. Anyway, then we return that number list. Then we are actually using this number list in the square number and store it in dictionaries. This one is going to take in that list as a parameter, as an argument, and then it's going to create an empty dictionary and loop over that list and square each number. And then we will store into the dictionary each number as the key and their square as the value. For example, if we initiate the numbers list by the generate numbers list from 1 to 5, then we will create a numbers list from 1 to 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the numbers dictionary will use this function and will display this output. 1 equals 1, 2 equals its square, which is 4, 3 equals 9, 4 equals 16, 5 equals 25. If we run this, as a matter of fact, we will see that we do print that dictionary. This is all fine, but let's introduce an error. What if we were to enter a string here into this function, which only should be accepting integers, for example? Then if we run this code again, we're going to run into an error. Type error can only concatenate string, not integer. And you can follow which lines have thrown this error. It started at number 26. Where we are initiating that function, and after that, line number 6 is throwing that error, which is when we are trying to create the list, and then eventually the error message is displayed to us as the end line right here. Type error can only concatenate. You can actually read the error messages from start to finish. You will, at the end, will receive what the error message is about, but you can actually get valuable information. For example, okay, there's something wrong in line 6, and you can go and try to find a solution to that. But here we're getting a type error because we are entering a string where only an integer should be accepted. Now our function actually uses some inline, a single line Python methods and whatnot. So this is going to be difficult to really understand what the error is happening, especially if you have complex code. So I have another function here, which I'm going to copy and paste and replace that. So this is a function. I've just replaced our original generate numbers list function with a function which uses a for loop and uses a try and except block to try to catch a type error. It initiates a numbers list as an empty list, and then it loops over the start and the end number +1, and then we append the list and then return the numbers list. But in the case if there is an error, as we are going to get right here with a string, then we're going to print invalid input, start and end must be integers. Let's run this. And as you will see, invalid input, start and end must be integers. What happened here is that we tried to execute this command, but since this end number is going to give a problem, we are checking for a type error, because in this case we are running into the integer versus string error, and then we can actually do something with that, do something under this except. So we can try something and then do something in case of a particular error. The problem here is that, as you see, in both cases our program actually exited, so completely stopped executing. There is a way that you can actually try to implement methods and ways so that your program, your application will handle errors dynamically so that your app doesn't crash. This utilizes try and except and some other methods which you can come up yourself, but I'm going to show you one that I've implemented in this toy example. Here I have replaced the same generate numbers list function with another function which uses a while loop. While loops can run until a certain condition is met or until they are being broken. In this case, if we successfully complete this for loop and generate our numbers list, then we break this loop. So this loop will break in that case. But under the except type error block, if we do catch an error, which we will when we actually input a string here, then we will print invalid input, but our program in this case is not going to exit or quit, but it's actually going to ask the user, please enter a new value for start. And then it's going to ask, please enter a new value for end, for example. So this way, our program, running it with the same error as we had run before with the string A, will be able to handle this error perfectly. See, we first get that invalid input start and end must be integers, and it's asking us for a new start value. I'm going to say 1 and value 5. In that case, we not only handled the error, but we received new user input and we were able to complete our program. Our app executed perfectly. We did not have a crashing app. In other words, our app did not crash. Another app I built is a programming tutor for Python and also for JavaScript, Rust, Go, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can watch the video on it here by clicking the link. I'll put this link into the description to the app. You can also download the code for that as well from my Patreon. I'll put these links in the description. So this is why error catching is important, and you can read more about it. Just Google or talk to GPT 3.5 or Turbo ChatGPT about it. It's really an interesting concept, and you can learn there are many different ways of error catching, different types of errors and whatnot. It's an interesting topic, but we're not going to cover everything, but this should give you a decent baseline. Now let's move on to debugging. It has been a while since I've installed Visual Studio Code, but as you see, there's this run and debug option. I believe if you don't see this run and debug option automatically right after you have a fresh install of Visual Studio Code, then make sure this extension is installed by Microsoft, Python, IntelliSense Pylance. See, it says debugging, multi-threaded remote, and all that. I have this already installed. So just in case, again, if you don't see this run and debug option, and make sure that you have this extension installed. So I have made a few changes. Everything remains the same about our code, except I have removed that error. So now we're going to correctly generate the numbers from 1 to 5. And our intention is to generate all numbers from 1 to 5, including the 5 itself, as indicated in our comment right here. N number is inclusive. However, I have removed that +1 as we had talked about, because the range was automatically is n number exclusive. So if we add 1 to it, then we make the n number inclusive. But what if we made a mistake and forgot this? And then we delete this. And now if we run this, everything will run just fine, but the output of the program application which we built is not going to be what we wanted. Let's run this. As you see, we have printed right here. Just take a look at this line. Let me clear this. You can clear your terminal by just typing clear. And now let's run this again. So we start fresh. See, we are getting a dictionary with 1, 2, 3, and 4. We are missing the value 5. So we did not get an error. Our application did not crash, but it did not produce the result which we wanted. So to be able to handle these situations, especially if your code is complex, you need to have some kind of debugging method in mind. For example, you can do print statements to do debugging. This is like a basic way of debugging. I'm just going to talk about the print statements real quick. In our for loop, I is a placeholder for all the values that's from start to end. It's going to start with 1, then I is going to change into 2, and then 3, and then 4, and hopefully 5. And then VR, as the I is generated within this loop, it is being appended to this empty list as 1, 2, 3, and so on. What if we were to here print I? Okay, if we were to add this and save it and run our code, now we're going to see that we are actually printing the I at each iteration of the loop, and we see that our I never actually gets to 5. So we can actually see we have now found what we need to debug. Our end number or the I never reaches 5, and we wanted 5 to be included in our. So then now we know that we should add 1 plus 1, so that 5 will become inclusive. And as you see, when we add plus 1, then we can actually see that 5 is printed. Print statements is great. You can put print statements everywhere. For example, we can put a print statement in the beginning saying that starting loop, for example. And then when just before we're about to break, we can say print right here, print loop finished. Now if we run this, we're going to get starting loop. Then we print all the I numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then when our loop is finished, and before we break it, we say that loop finished. And then we get our output. So print statements is a good way to be able to debug. You can print your variables. You can actually do like waypoints like this, so you know what's happening in your code. But if you have a lot of lines of code, 100 or 200, print statements become really difficult, and you got to go back and then you have to delete them for your production code possibly and stuff like that, or comment them out. So this is where the Visual Studio's debugger comes into play. I have changed our code back to its state where it was producing undesired results, where it was cutting off at 4, and I have commented out the print statement so they won't execute. A quick way in Visual Studio Code to comment something or comment out of something is to use Control/. With this keyboard shortcut, you can quickly comment in and out of different lines of code. Anyway, so how the debugger works is that there's this line numbering for each line of code, okay? And then there's this faint red dot right next to it. These are what's called breakpoints, and these won't work with comments or docstrings, but they will work with actual lines of code. So we're going to put one right here at the beginning of our loop, okay? I'm just going to put a breakpoint. You can put multiple breakpoints, but we're just going to use one. And then when we come to run and debug, and then click run and debug, or we come to this run menu at the top and say start debugging, or we use F5 as the keyboard shortcut, then we're going to run this code, and I'm going to select Python file. We're going to run this code in the debug mode. And this indicator up here is going to pop out, and our code will execute until it reaches this line of code, and this yellow arrow will appear around the red dot, meaning that our program has paused executing right at this point. Now, the only real two options here I use is the here button and then the step over button. You can also restart your code, and you can stop debugging right here, stop your code. I almost never use these two, but you can check them out yourself. This one will actually continue running the code, okay? But this Step over will allow us to execute this code line by line. Let's click on it. Now you see we jump to try and we have paused. At the same time, pay attention that we are seeing our variables being generated in real time. For example, the end number, start number is being assigned as 1. End number is assigned as 5, as you see, because we have executed this line of code right here. This actually brought us into this function, generate numbers list. And now we are at this juncture. Our numbers list is also initiated as an empty list. And now we're going to try to enter the for loop. And then so we can see that our I is now 1. And now when we execute this append line, then the number 1 will be appended to our numbers list. Let's do this again. Now our I is 2, and then it's appended. Now we'll do this one more time. 3 is appended. So we see that I is changing as intended. Numbers list is being changed as intended. So far, so good. And then we do our fourth, and then we see the 4 is added to our list. But then when we run, we go out of the loop. So now we see that, oh, there's a problem with our end number. We have now accurately identified what the problem is. Now we know we have to add a 1 here because 4 was our last number, but we wanted 5 in there. So this is how you can use the debugger. I hope you will find this useful and use it in your code. You can continue to execute the code. For example, we're at the breakpoint. Now we just break out of that loop. We're going to return the numbers list, and then number dictionary function is going to execute, and then we are going to print the numbers. Pay attention to the terminal, and we have printed the dictionary. I just want to mention also that I have started doing AI workshops, roundtable discussions, and live QA sessions for my Patreon supporters. If you become a Patreon supporter, you can also take advantage of these events as well. Currently, we're going to do it once every 2 weeks, and there is a different for each level of Patreon support. And the higher you are, you can attend more of those workshops as well. Just keep that in mind. So now we're going to build our first app. Before we do that, we want to create a new virtual environment. We have talked about virtual environments in the previous video, part 1. I'll put the link in the description. Please check that out. We are going to use Conda to create a new environment. We need to start a command prompt. To do that, we need to first have a terminal up and running. You can come to these 3 dots. If your screen is too small, this should usually appear right here. We're going to create a new terminal. And once our terminal is activated, we're going to come to this arrow button, down arrow, and click on command prompt. And our command prompt is going to engage. It starts me automatically in an environment. I'm going to deactivate that environment real quick. So now we are in our base environment. I'm going to create Conda create -n to give this environment a name. And then let's say OpenAI test. Okay. And we want to specify Python version. You can specify Python version for your environments. Let's say 3.10. And then just click, and this environment should get created. We just have to say yes. And once it's done, we can activate this environment. Our environment is created. Now we need to activate it. You can just copy this by selecting and right-clicking, and then right-clicking also will paste it into our terminal. Once we click that, we now enter this isolated virtual environment OpenAI_test. Now we can install OpenAI, which will be the only thing we'll need. All we have to do is pip install OpenAI and click, press enter, and we will install OpenAI. It is being installed. We have successfully installed everything that is necessary. We can do a quick pip list command to see all our packages, and we see that OpenAI was installed version 0.27.4. This is good. We are going to create a simple app in which we can actually talk to GPT 3.5 Turbo or GPT-4. Here in the OpenAI documentation, okay, if you have an API access, if you go to platform.openai, log in, all you have to do is click on documentation. And here I'm clicking chat completion. And here there's a snippet of code. Now we're going to try to use this. I'm also going to try to showcase like the kind of attitude that I display when I'm creating something from documentation. What if this is the first time I'm trying? This is the approach I would take. So I'm going to just copy this code and paste it into my Visual Studio Code. We need to define our OpenAI API key. I have already defined it in my environment variables. It will pick that up from there, but you can define your API key like this in your code, but this is not very much so recommended, but just to test quick things out, this is fine. Just ensure that your API key always remains secure. I'm just going to comment this out, as I know that OpenAI will detect my API key from my user environment variables with this key. Open in all caps, OpenAI. Just like this, OpenAI API key is an environment variable and it's automatically being detected from there. So you need to create this key in your OpenAI user environment variables. Anyway, as we see, this thing is going to make a call, but we need to assign it to something. That's why we often see we're going to say response equals the result of the call, right? This will assign this automatically to response. And we also want to probably change the system messages. You can actually move the messages outside of this call. I'm just defining it the exact same way without just with the system message, because we want to append the user message. We want to get the user's input and append it to these messages. And we always want to use that messages, right? As we keep track of the history as well. So how can we do this? We can apply something like this. We are first defining a system message. Then we are asking user for an input using the input method from Python. Then I actually moved this line of code up here. Then we are appending to the messages the role and the user. Role is the user and the content is the user input. And we can actually print this messages, see what it looks like. Let's comment out everything else and run this. If we run this, we're going to get a user input option into terminal. And I'm going to say hi there. And if we click, we can see that our messages has been updated. It has the system message and it has the user message right now. So all we have to do is now actually uncomment this and get a response from OpenAI using GPT 3.5 Turbo, in this case, using this messages, right? So we have maintained the entire functionality, but now we can actually get the user input. And then we want to append the response to the messages as well. Let's comment this out. So now we are receiving the response in the response object, and then we are appending as the system role. This has to be assistant role, and then we are appending the content of the response as well. If we actually come back to the documentation, OpenAI actually shows us a sample response object. When we initiate this and assign it to a response variable, this is what that response variable will contain. It's an object. And actually, what we need is the content, is the assistant's response. If you take a look at this object, it will actually return some valuable information, such as the model name, how many tokens was in the prompt, how many tokens was in completion, and the total token number. But since we need, and we also see that this is the role, that is the assistant, and this is the response. To get this, we need to get into the choices key, right? That's why we're doing this. And then we want to get the 0th element of this list. Then we want to select the messages key. And then under the messages, we want to select the content as the key so that we can access this value. So I'm actually going to copy this, which gives us access to the content. And I'm actually going to print it here, as well as replace content's response with that. Here we go. So now this should work. We're going to print the response. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this. We're going to ask for a user to enter something. Then we're going to get a response from OpenAI's GPT 3.5 Turbo. We're going to print the entire response. We're going to print the content of that response. And we're going to append it to our messages that we are building our conversational history by appending the response to the assistant role. Let's see how this will work. Let's run this. It is asking us for something. Let's say hi there. As we see, we first get to print the first messages, then we print the entire response. In this case, we only used 30 tokens. And content was, hello, how can I assist you today? And we are printing that in this line. And it had printed that line as well. And we have appended it to our messages. So this is great. This is actually, we've just built an app that just runs from our terminal. But as you see, we can only have one-off interactions with it. Let's see how we can turn it into a chat-like experience. So we know that we are defining our original messages right here. And then we are asking for a user input. We know that we're going to keep wanting to ask the user for its input. We want to continue appending to the messages. We want to keep continuing to make calls to the API to get responses. And we don't need to print no longer. We can just delete these. And then we want to append the assistant message, and we want to do this ongoing. So to be able to do that, all we have to do is create a while true loop. Let's give it an empty and just grab this entire line of code and tab it over, because this is Python syntax. You can quickly tab one to the right, one to the left using control, right square bracket and left square bracket, just like this, while you have all the lines selected. Now this should run indefinitely because we are entering a loop. We are continuously asking for user input, and we are continuously appending to the ongoing conversation. And we are creating the messages outside of that loop. Let's run this. Here we go. I'm going to say, hi, my name is Echo. Actually, we are not printing the assistant's response. Let's quickly do that. Yeah, we'll say assistant's response plus the response. Let's run this again. Breaking out of it. Run it again. Hi, my name is Echo. Oh, we just did the wrong response object. Just have to replace it with the correct version. Sorry about that, but running into errors are gonna happen. Hi, my name is Echo. Now we're getting a response. Hello, Echo. How can I assist you today? And then automatically it goes back to the user input. Now asking, and then I can say, what is my name? Let's see if it is keeping track of our history. It says your name is Echo, because we are continually appending to the messages. So this will keep track of your chat history. So this is an app you can run from your terminal. If you follow through all the way, congratulations, you just built your first AI-powered app. Now we're going to talk about more extensively about how to build the graphical user interface in the future videos, and talk about everything else more in depth as well. I hope you enjoy this, and see you in the next one.